Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Friday live stream. I didn't do last week, I did the Bridges of Meaning question and answer, so I didn't do a week in review. So I'll be looking at some of the other videos from the week before. Why do I do this? Um, it lends itself because of the process of my channel. And I know some people grab a headline or a thumbnail or a title and they jump in and then they're sort of shocked at what they find, that this guy won't get to the point and he sort of rambles. Well, the channel I in fact do use to think out loud. And you can tell Jeff from who started Randos United was in town yesterday, and we had a little chat, and he asked me about ADHD, and I think, yeah, I'm very ADHD. If you want to know at least a tenth of what is rolling through my head, you can watch my channel, because it's probably about the correct proportion. And for every video I make, I could make 9 more. I just don't have the time to make 9 more, and I doubt even this channel would bear the making of 10 times as many videos as I already make, which is quite frankly too much if I wanted to be a successful YouTuber. But here we are. And what happens then is, after I make a video, as with the video I released today, Beasts and Swarms of the Sea Vying to Colonize Your Soul, I hadn't completely finished the Megan Phelps Roper Oxford interview. I'm currently actually listening to the Sam Harris Making Sense interview with Megan Phelps Roper. And I hadn't finished the Elon Musk interview. I found a copy of it in its entirety, which was super helpful to sort of gain perspective on. And so I always have the videos that I make are, for the most part, sort of a dipping into my mental process and giving you just a taste of what I'm thinking about in that moment. And often what happens is, it's the end of the day and I think, I've got enough time to make a video. And so I will sit down and I'll think of all of the things rolling through my head over the last 24 to 48 hours, what seems most salient. And then I'll just pick something. And there's usually 3 or 4 or 5 different ideas. Sometimes those ideas will stay with me a number of days and they'll get a little bit more ripe and then they'll become a video. Sometimes those ideas will sort of pass and then months or weeks or months later, they'll sort of crop up again and I'll make a video about them again. So what I'm doing with sort of these week in reviews is to sort of go back over to, maybe it's maybe that's what I'll have to put a thumbnail on. This is a cow chewing its cud. I'm ruminating on the videos that I've made over the last couple of weeks and give you some upcoming thoughts. Now, I've got the comment section on in my StreamYard. So if you have a question, I'd say ask the question about the video I'm talking about and just put question in all caps. Obviously, some people use super chats, which is fine. Super chats gets my attention very easily. Yes, Andrea, I just started this. I had to stop midway through the Benjamin Boyce conversation to jump into the live stream. Sorry, Eric. Yeah, and I'm sure I'll talk a little bit about the Benjamin Boyce conversation with Peugeot and Wokel, because that was a big thing that happened this week. And this was a very rich week. Actually, the last 2 weeks were quite rich. So, when I talked to Jonathan Peugeot with the Benjamin Boyce thing, I know that he had been doing a ton of traveling. And while I really enjoy traveling, I also really enjoy not traveling, because not traveling allows me to travel via podcasts and YouTubes and books and to let me make videos. And so traveling means I can't make so many videos. And usually the events, so we have an event coming up in May in Southern California with John Vervaeke and Jonathan Peugeot. And then there is an event at the end of July in Washington, D.C. with Mark from More Christ and Joe from Gist of Joe and Spencer Clavin. And Michael, the sociologist. and and so I really have to. I've had one conversation with Michael. I haven't had any conversations with Spencer Clavin, so I really have to sort of track him down and see if I can bring him in for a randos conversation, because there's probably a lot to talk about. So let's jump in. Can't stay, but good morning. Good morning, Michael Martin. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. So let's jump into the week. Oh, where's my mouse? Here's my mouse. Let's jump into. Let's see, how big can we get this? All right. Is this? Yeah, there we go. Let's jump into a couple of weeks in review. A couple of weeks ago, the Monday video was the situation with the Exodus series. I know there are a number of people out there that say, Paul, what you really need to do is focus on the Exodus series and do the commentary on the Exodus series. Again, the difficulty with that is I do not have permission to currently do with the Exodus series like I did with the Genesis series. I think the Exodus seminar is worthy of that kind of attention. I have been going through it. I have gone through episode 12. I'm currently working on episode 13. Episode 14 just dropped this week. So once I finish with 13, I'll look at 14. And I've got tons and tons of thoughts about it. I think the series is full of really good insights and content. And I think, again, for those who are just trying to figure out what to think about Jordan Peterson, I think in a lot of ways, Jordan Peterson is at his best in a seminar like that. That shouldn't come as any surprise given his long history of seminars in the university. And he's got a great group of people around him. I'm going to say this, but here it is. I don't think Ben Shapiro helps the process. There are already a lot of guys around the table, and Ben Shapiro talks a lot. And I haven't found his contributions better in any remarkable way than anyone else's contributions. And I think actually I think he jumped in episode 12. His were sort of the bottom of the barrel, and he tends to it's just Ben Shapiro and how he talks. It's not his area. And he tends to turn a conversation that already leans towards the political more to the political. So yeah, I hope Ben doesn't become a regular in there. There's already a lot of interesting people, and in fact, as I've noted before, as the series went on, part of me liked the fact that there isn't a biblical scholar there, but there are moments when they really could use a biblical scholar, because there's often moments when even a fairly fact-based question in terms of biblical scholarship, the two theologians that are there aren't biblical scholars. And so there are moments when even I could have answered a question that it's just a fairly simple question in terms of technical aspects of biblical scholarship. And Dennis Prager is not a biblical scholar. He clearly grew up with learning Hebrew. And I've really grown to enjoy Dennis Prager through this series. And I appreciate a lot of what he says and does, but he's not a biblical scholar. He does have some insight into the text because he has studied it closely, but that technical aspect he doesn't have. So the video itself, God's Elohim question erupts beneath the thinning modernist dualisms of Exodus. Yeah, that's a crazy title. It really touches on what Susan Black Roberts. Now, Susan Black, she's part of the Bruderhof group, Plow magazine. I did a thing on their treatment of Jesus and John Wayne. Great publication, great podcast, great people. She not too long ago married Alistair Roberts, making that whole community even greater. She asks on Twitter this morning, this is a really interesting way to understand Manichaeanism and Peterson as Manichaean. Anyone who's read more Jordan Peterson than I have, does this sound correct? And the tweet she's responded to is Manichaeanism, or Star Wars metaphysics for short, has long plagued Catholicism, and Augustine is perhaps its greatest critic. But Peterson's pseudoscience requires it because he frames reality and history as an epic battle between being and meaning. I don't think that's I don't think that gets at it at all. But where this video sort of emerged, this video is a response video to a pretty meaty 10-minute clip that Peterson posted. So a lot of if you go to my blog, you can, and you search like Jordan Peterson Exodus, I have listed all of the clips that have surfaced on Peterson's channel and the Clips channel, at least all the clips that I've found. And I have thoughts of, if the Exodus seminar does not begin to creep out onto open YouTube this April, which Jordan commented it would, but it hasn't yet. I think One Man's Odyssey gets it right there. Reading Joseph Campbell now, I've come to realize that Peterson is doing for Christianity and possibly Judaism what Campbell did for Buddhism, framing it in a Jungian light. I think that's right. But the earlier clips and teasers that were put out early in the Exodus seminar tended to be 4, 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes. In the later episodes, so the first 1 through 8 is sort of the first session, and 8 and 9 through, I don't know how many they're going to go to, 16 perhaps, is the second. And those teasers and clips are 8, 10 minutes longer. So that gives me a little bit more something to work with. So it's really cool. In episode 10, a big piece of what is beneath the conversation of this little corner, and what gives this little corner energy, is, and I could bring Luke into this conversation, I could bring Nate into this conversation. A lot of what gives this little corner energy is, in fact, what I get at a little bit when I talk about God number 1 and God number 2. There are all sorts of persistent dualisms in the long history of Christianity and Judaism and Islam. And I think the Bible holds some of these dualisms in tension. One of the chief ones is the creator-creature distinction. Now, I am not going to, in fact, the creator-creature distinction is perhaps the chief contribution in about one of the biggest frames imaginable to speculating on philosophy that the world has known. And the Jews get credit. Not the Jews, but the Hebrew Bible. I'll say it that way, because saying the Jews is sort of a anarchism, because it's anachronism, because Jews, of course, come later. But the creator-creature distinction and the kinds of stuff that Kaufman writes about. So you have that dualism, and that dualism has to remain. Yet there's tension within it, and that's where you get at God number 1 and God number 2. You get at it with the divine passive in Scripture. There's many, many ways in which the Bible very much understands that dualism and that tension. And so much of what happens in this little corner is working through into higher resolution the tensions of that dualism. And this dualism gets played out. It really gets accentuated in modernity, and that dualism tends to propagate all sorts of sub-dualisms that we're struggling with, like the natural, supernatural, sort of Cartesian dualism. And when you look at what Peterson, Peugeot, Vervaeke are doing differently, but each of them are trying to work the tension of that dualism into a more united perspective. Peterson does that, as Peugeot rightly points out, from working from the bottom up. John Vervaeke is working at it from the perspective increasingly of Neoplatonism. Part of the reason people look at Christianity and say that's Platonism for the masses is because, of course, Plato had his own dualism. It's okay. So if you can give us credit. Plato has his own dualism, obviously, with respect to the forms and the allegory of the cave and all of that. So it was not surprising to see that break out in. It's amazing that it took up until episode 10 of the Exodus seminar for it to really come out. And one of the English scholars, the only one that was there, can't think of him right now, he really put his finger on it right there. He says, I think we've been skirting around that, and he's right. So all of these talks about, where is all of these talks about natural law, all of this stuff is getting at this tension within Christianity and within the Hebrew Bible. I think I often look to Isaiah 6, the beginning, what the declaration of the angels in the temple to Isaiah, as a real nice poetic formulation of it. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. There's a dualism. Holy, 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 separate, separate, separate is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. It's right there. It's the creation of the dualism and the tension with which that dualism is. So this is part of the reason why this little corner has been so friendly to a whole variety of religious traditions and sub-traditions, is that so many of the differences within these major religious traditions have to do with how the dualism is managed. And so, and one of the elements that this comes out, and I mentioned Michael Heiser a number of times. I know some people are big fans of Michael Heiser, other people are critics of Heiser. I've read some Heiser, and every time I go back to reading him, I don't find him terribly interesting. I think he's pointing out something that is there, and you can see it if you just work with the whole question of what on earth do we mean by God or gods or Elohim or the heavenly council. And in other words, all of those things were are part of the way that the Hebrew scriptures work this tension. That and you find it in narrative ways. You find it at the beginning of the book of Job, for example, where's this heavenly court, and that's sort of the first introduction in the Bible of the accuser. And of course you've got the serpent, which is very much a chaos creature, says John Walton. But of course, the serpent in the garden will get connected to the great serpent and the beast in the book of Revelation. So, I mean, the Bible is continually working through these tensions, and I think the Bible really tries to hold these things in tension. And so many of the conversations around, so pantheism tends to collapse the tension into a particular monism. Panentheism tends to, there you go, Luke, I said the word. Panentheism tends to give a little bit more space. But Christianity has been obviously working on those things. And then in modernity, you have, again, what missiologists looked at in terms of the excluded middle. All of this stuff, as we just continue to work on these questions. And that's really the area that Peterson has been working in. I see the comments have gone into Hegel. That's right, good, evil. I've been reading Chesterton. This is why I love his writing on the book of Job. It touches on all these ideas of God's judgment on good, evil, ideologies created by people to explain reality. So, yeah, that was the first. So that was on episode 10 of the Exodus seminar. And then after that, I thought, well, there's a lot in all of those seminars that I really want to talk about. And so I decided to just go back and grab a clip. And they had the clip about the Hebrew midwives. And again, that was sort of following in the conversation of the gods, Elohim question erupts, because right away, you can see the tension already in episode 1 with respect to, are those midwives Hebrew or Egyptian? And the point was made in that little clip, is a far shorter clip, nicely, that they are God-fearers. And so again, you can see this tension in the Hebrew scriptures. You can see this tension in the New Testament. The God-fearers are sort of these Hellenistic, not totally converted Jews that are worshiping in the synagogues. And then you find in the book of Acts all of these noble Romans, and on and on and on. So these tensions are all over the Bible, and you bump into it. And once you're aware of this tension, you're going to see it all over the place. And I think in many ways, a lot of what gives the conversations in this little corner their power is because of these tensions. And these tensions they just run through the entire history of religion and religious conversation in the world. All right. Then the next video, let's see, I'm going to mute this. The next video I did was, it's so to describe how I make videos. It's so tortured because I get an idea. I wanted to talk a little bit more about this whole idea in my Sunday school class about law and Romans 7. And for a very long time, I've wanted to do more with John Vervaeke's conversation with Lex Fridman, because I thought that was a really good platform for John, because I thought John articulated, John is getting better and better, as hopefully we all are, better and better at bringing his ideas to a general audience. I mean, part of what has made Peterson so popular is Peterson has a real gift for bringing difficult things to a general audience. And John is a great teacher, but I think John's just got so much there in order to sort of whittle it down to this and then this and then this and then this and then this, and with nice little illustrations. It's basically the preacher problem. And I thought John really did well with Lex in there. And I wanted to touch on the question of this idea that in certain polling, the particular religious tribe doesn't impact, let's say, the efficacy of the religion. And so I talked about that in my adult Sunday school class. So I wanted to talk about that with the Lex Fridman thing. So I set that video up with the Lex Fridman conversation. I was able to get that in. And then I added the adult Sunday school class portion. And then I found this really interesting conversation between John and a Jungian therapist, Brooke Sproul. And those are really nice talks. And she seems like an absolutely delightful person. And she said a number of things that sort of got me thinking about this quest for a spiritual home. Because one of the things, again, that Peterson really brought to the table is he's a practitioner. Jonathan Pageau, a big part of the reason I think Jonathan Pageau had to get so clear on a lot of the stuff that he's sharing with us now is because it's always in the application of something that you really have to make all of those choices and get specific. And there are very few things that require as much application as, let's say, carving or painting or doing art. Because once you bring something into existence, you have to know it down to a very real level. And so I thought John's conversation with Brooke Sproul was a really interesting one and a good one. And her story, of course, and I might come back to this next week because I'm really sort of continuing to chew on the Megan Phelps Roper story. Just finished listening to the Oxford interview. very interesting talk she gave at Oxford, the Oxford Union. So Brooke Sproul left a more conservative Christianity, and she's sort of, and I don't want to get her wrong, and so if she wants to send me a message and come on for a chat, because if I sort of use you this way on the internet, you certainly do have a right to come on my channel and correct me. But she seems to have left sort of a stricter, narrower evangelical position and gone over to more of a new age posture and less sectarian. I want to be, you got to be really careful when you try to describe this kind of transition, which is not uncommon. And so, she talks about people who make these journeys, whatever the rest of us think of their journeys, they usually don't make them unless they, for one reason or another, are experiencing some upgrade or tangible benefit because of it. And so it's getting warm. Sacramento's winter's finally ending. I can take off this fleece that you see in almost every video. You can actually see a colored shirt underneath it. And so she was really interesting to process. And then, of course, Megan Phelps Roper, through the trailer, I was just letting you know that I was listening to the J.K. Rowling's. It's an exceptional podcast. You really got something when me and Sam Harris can agree that this is a much listened podcast. So I thought that was a good conversation. And then I mentioned before that Melissa Dougherty. So one of the things that had been rolling around in my head was the J.P. Sears Finding God, Got God t-shirt. He had a straightforward video about God and religion. And a number of you mentioned very helpfully that he sort of moved from California to the Bible Belt, and that'll do it for you. And so then I'd found a commentary on her channel, and I knew nothing about her. And then Karen Wong, this is where feedback from all of you in the comment section and emails, and even though emails I miss a lot of emails, but comment section and DMs and Twitter and such, Karen Wong had said, oh, Megan or Melissa Dougherty, this was very pertinent to her journey because, and it's like, I didn't know anything about her. So then I went to her page, and at least then on her page was From New Age to Jesus, My Story Out of Deception. And it was such a lovely testimony. It was such a beautiful story. She was so honest. She was so sincere. It was so heartfelt. And what that did was just set up for me the tensions that we're really going to feel, that are always here in this corner, because we've got some people who are sort of breaking out of a restrictive or tyrannical or abusive or unsatisfying religious milieu and going to another. Some of those people are leaving traditions much more like my own, that tend to be conservative Christian, small or Orthodox churches, and going into more New Age stuff. And other people are leaving New Age stuff and going the other way. And hence so often the titles of my videos happen after I make the video, because like I said, when I started this, I think out loud in all of these videos. And so I don't know what the video is about until I've finished making the video. And so by the end of the video, I began to realize that you guys still fighting about Hegel in the comments, huh? Wow. By the end of the video, I realized that, that's really a tension in this quest for the spiritual home. And it's a big part of this little corner. And so a bunch of the OGs in this little corner, like Luke, Luke went to John Piper's church, and I can be pretty free with Luke's story because he's free with his own story. And we've got others who have become Orthodox and Roman Catholic. And so we've got, in this little corner, we've got people sort of going both ways. And part of what makes this little community remarkable is that we are actually striving to have a culture where people going both ways on these continuums can continue to talk and compare notes. And I think that is nothing but better. Now, of course, all of us have our positions, our beliefs, our postures, our tribal loyalties. All of us have those things, okay? But to not have those things get so in the way, while at the same time not losing them, that we can have productive conversations with each other and learn from each other. That's really what this little corner is about. It's really what this is about, in my opinion. So, yeah, that's where that video came from. And then, of course, in the next one, I start getting into the J.K. Rowling's podcast. It's an excellent podcast, and one of the things that I noted was that in so many ways, if you listen to that podcast, Harry Potter is sort of a Horcrux. Question. Question. I hope I didn't miss any other questions. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you for using all caps. Was the leaker being a Discord orthobro symbolism or just inevitable reality? I don't know what leaker. I don't know what leaker, Jacob. So, yeah, and I hope to. And again, I don't know if it'll come to fruition just by virtue of the way I make videos, but I hope to do more on this podcast. I always go after this stuff with a little bit of trepidation. Biden leaks? Oh gosh, I used to be a political junkie. I gave it up in 2015 when I watched the increasing level of foolishness of what was happening. And if you want to see what has become of professional journalism, just watch the full Elon Musk BBC interview. The fact that the BBC would send this guy talk to Elon Musk, whoever made that decision should be fired. Just unbelievable. So, yeah, so then I get into the Harry Potter stuff. And where are we? Oh, the Mary Harrington conversation. That was such a lovely time. I should talk a little bit about Good Friday and Easter. Now, today is Good Friday, I suppose, for the Orthodox, and Sunday will be Pascua for the Orthodox. And I know you can just look at the views, and both of these rough drafts for Good Friday and Easter were better than average, but there's a real connection between what I do during the week and what I do in my rough drafts. Sometimes it's more clear than others. It was just really good for me going through the parables of Jesus in Matthew as a part of Lent this year and getting a sense for the value of apocalypse in Good Friday. And it's in that question. Let's hit the question. Where do you think the Harry Potter LARPers will end up? Seems like the fall of J.K. Rowling's could end the fandom liturgy. I don't know, because apparently HBO is going to make a new series. That in and of itself is going to be very interesting to watch, because if you want to learn anything about human beings, watch them as they do their religion. Can you make a new series? Do you really have to wait 30 or 40 years until the people who grew up with the old series are now sort of out of the um, out of the conversation because they're too old to be listened to by the young? So yeah, it won't last though. It won't last. Um, yeah, there was a great tweet on that I tweeted. One of the things that I picked up is a better scanner, so I can take paper stuff and bring it onto the channel better. Anyway, my Zoomer kid. That's interesting. It's a millennial thing. My Zoomer kids are mostly Harry Potter ignorant. Wow. Um, can you make a new series? Ask the writers of the New Testament. The BBC follows the orders of the CIA. Oh, I've gotten emails, ban the secular Quranism. They're a nuisance. But yeah, you guys know me. I'm a sucker for an outlier, and I've got a few things to say about that too. We'll see if I say them today. So yeah, Easter. And making an Easter sermon is always sort of difficult. So you never know who's going to be in the room. And actually we had like 0 visitors this Easter, which was a surprise because we had a lot of people the 2 previous Sundays to Easter, and then Easter attendance was a little low. It kind of took me by surprise, but you never know what you're going to get with a real thing like a church. Um, a lot of what I may say in Chino is in this sermon. The whole question of the quest for a spiritual home, our hungry hearts, Augustine, which John cited in the conversation leading up to the conference. So Easter sermons are places to sort of show how you can lay out the gospel through the resurrection to as broad an audience as you can. So, and that of course isn't reflected in the demographics of a fairly nerdy channel. Here forgot that I'm doing this. All right, so Easter and Good Friday. Of course, we had the Freddie and Paul show with Easter. Rick, we have the drama in the Freddie and Paul show over the hourglass. It was a few Sundays ago that Rick had enough because when Nancy's there, oh, great. Nate's coming to Chino with his wife. That's awesome. I'm trying to talk my wife into coming to Chino. We'll see if that happens. I think my wife is a little scared about the whole thing because it's just going to be a lot. But where was I? Oh yeah, the Freddie and Paul show. So when Nancy's sermon reports are getting longer and longer, and they're rapping and singing more songs and then more guests, and so Rick finally laid down the law that we need an hourglass, and then before the show, Freddie and Nancy were trying to negotiate away from the hourglass. Well, maybe we'll start the hourglass after we start the song. It's like, no, I don't exercise a lot of say over what we put in the show. But yeah, initially when I did it, I wanted between 5 and 7 minutes. So yeah, the Freddie and Paul show. Oh yes, the Pope and Disney. I'm still waiting for this Hulu and Kierkegaard. I'm still waiting. The Pope thing was sort of what got me going towards this. And I didn't talk about the Pope on Disney or Hulu too much in the show because we haven't seen it. And Kale Kale sent me that article by Larry Chapp, which had the links to the Vatican thing. For me, what's interesting for me about this is is the question of someone said it very well in a comment, which it was on Twitter, and I kept the tweet because they used, I think it was a story from Kierkegaard of there's a carnival or a circus outside of town and it's burning, and so the clown with his makeup goes into the town and tries to convince the people of the town that they need to heed the call of the clown in makeup, and everybody keeps laughing at them. And that is in some ways a window into the challenge of preachers, of the Pope, and especially there with the Pope, because hey, I'm not wearing vestments. Why not? Jacob bought me a nice shirt. My wife didn't really quite have the correct size. My neck is a little bigger. But should I wear a clerical collar when I make these videos? Is that sort of like the clown coming into the town? And first, so of course the papacy. So then you kind of have the Pope, who is dressed in some ways in medieval vestments. And part of the reason I've been reading Vatican I and Vatican II and spending a lot of time thinking about the Pope, it doesn't, I know for a lot of the Catholics and the fight going on among the Catholics about the Pope, this sort of fuels it. But for me, the whole question is of, if you are to have a papacy, what on earth does it mean? What on earth are you to do with it? And how on earth is the Pope supposed to be in the world? Because what this does is this takes all this energy and focuses it to one point, and that's an extremely difficult place to be. Yeah, should have bought a size larger, Jacob. It's an extremely difficult place to be. And so when you take the Pope, and I saw a correction on Twitter too, they weren't in the Vatican, they were in another little Italian town, and they spoke Spanish, and it was just basically a hodgepodge. And so on one hand, I deeply appreciate that. I think the Pope should be in a place like that. And I think it's okay for the Pope to be filmed in a place like that. But the entire thing is just so overwhelmingly fraught. And so much of this is within the evangelical winsome wars. Because on one hand, and these tensions actually are tensions between Vatican I and Vatican II. Vatican I, in order to try to fight modernity and democracy and all of these massive movements that have changed Europe and were changing Europe in the 19th century, Ultramontanism sort of raises the Pope up above the clouds and invests the Pope with tremendous power and authority. And so Vatican I, in a sense, is sort of like Pacific Rim, where these giant human robots are going out to fight the beasts that come out of the sea. And that is sort of a shorthand way of me understanding Ultramontanism, where you take the Pope and you make him into a giant robot that can go out there and do battle with the beast of modernity. That's Vatican I. Vatican II, they realize, as in the story of Pacific Rim, the beasts are only getting bigger. And in fact, you have the Second World War, where you weren't fighting against the French Revolution or democracy. You were fighting against Hitler and Stalin and Nazism and communism. And suddenly democracy is like, well, yeah, I think we should side with the Allies. Because one way to look at that war is sort of democracy versus these totalitarian governments. And praise God, democracy wins. And maybe democracy always had to win, but democracy won. So Vatican II comes, and Vatican II wants to sort of stop with making the Pope into a giant robot. And now the Pope is going to be a cuddly toy. And so then you bring him in, you put him into the room with these kids, and now I get critiqued and criticized for that sometimes too. I'm too nice to Claire Caw. I'm too nice to Jacob. I'm too nice to nobody says I'm too nice to Chad because everybody loves Chad. That's why he's Pope, right, Chris? I'm too nice to Grail Country, to Nate, and I'm too nice to John Vervaeke, and I'm too nice to the Orthodox, and I'm too nice to the Catholics, and I'm too nice to Doug Wilson, and I'm too nice to everyone. I'm the squishy toy guy. Or am I? So it's this diverse excellencies that we wrestle with. And that's right. But Kale, you say Voltron, but in some ways, the Pope is supposed to, be Voltron always assembled. So, and I find this issue tremendously interesting. And so really happy to look at the contributions of Christopher Mastropietro. Got a chance to meet Chris in Thunder Bay. Some of you might remember my conversation with Chris. I mean, the dude opens his mouth and poetry comes out, and which is why he's such a good partner with John. Not to take anything away from John, but John is technical and scientific and accurate and all of these things, and Christopher just comes out and brings a lot of beauty and fluency and poetry to the conversation. So, and of course, the challenge with Kierkegaard is this strange man. I don't remember the title of the biography of Kierkegaard that I read, but it was a profoundly moving book. When you look at the strange man, he's just the absolute misfit. He would have in some ways fit into this little corner, because this little corner is the island of misfit toys, and Kierkegaard was the king of misfits. And he was low in agreeableness, and he's fighting this, and he's writing this obscure stuff with all of these pseudonyms, and he's in love with this woman and she loves him, but they can't make it work because, of course, who on earth could manage a relationship with someone like Kierkegaard? But yet he's wrestling not with the papacy, but with a Protestant version of it, where, this is where I get into sort of the swarm and the beast. If something like the BBC is a beast because it's a structured hierarchy with a mind and with a head and with all of that, Twitter is more like a swarm. And there are strengths and weaknesses to both sides. And so in many ways, with ultramontanism, the papacy sort of becomes beast-like, and that, well, now they're more like the BBC. And Protestantism is more swarm-like. And so we're watching these things go on. So the whole papal conversation for me is super interesting. Even Kierkegaard would have been a challenge for the TLC. I think you're right, Sam. Question: isn't the problem with the Pope that he's supposed to be first among equals? Does the Pope, as the head of the church, work without the church's patriarch to keep him in check? Well, this is the big question of the Vatican I book by John O'Malley. Because and so Vatican I basically settled on the big beast, and Vatican II. So in some ways, various forms of authoritarianism are in fact that big beast. And part of the irony of, at the same time, the church is reaching for ultramontanism, which is sort of making the big, massive Pope, whereas before, and Kel Zeldin can talk about this in much better ways than I can. Whereas before, the Pope was supposed to be the mouthpiece of the church, but the church was sort of the bishops and this body, and the Pope was to be the mouthpiece. Then in Vatican I, you see this tension where now the Pope is the author of. In other words, it's coming from God down out. Now, I think that is a result of the tensions that are within the swarm, that we want to hear God speak. And so Douglas Wilson's the teaser clip for his conversation with John Anderson, basically Douglas Wilson says, it's basically a monarchical thing, and this is a Protestant doing it. So it's Yeah, it's all scrambled. So that's the tension, Eric, that's in a lot of that. Kate James, what does make you angry? What's your relationship with anger and rage? Has there been any interactions with those forces? With me personally, I get angry. Um, I have learned to be careful with my public expressions of anger because one is so prone to sin with them. But anger is important. And again, what I always say about emotions, there are two big sins with emotions that people often make. One is to divinize your emotions, and the other is to not listen to them. So, what makes me angry? I get angry when children are hurt. I get angry when people are unfairly treated. I get angry when. So, I want to talk more about the whole transgender thing, but it's really hard. It's interesting. Sam Harris, at the beginning of his Making Sense podcast, when he talks to Megan Phelps Roper about the podcast, goes into has to have this big disclaimer statement about transgender. The difficulty with so many of these groups right now is that when you say transgender, you sound like you're talking about one thing, but there are a myriad of things beneath it. There are a myriad of causes for this um, attempt to cross over. Peterson said in his conversation with the doctor Grossman, was it Miriam Grossman? That was a good conversation. I'm glad Peterson sort of cleaned up his act within about the first 10 minutes, um, and sort of shut up and let her talk more. But Peterson made the point, and I think he's right that this male female thing, this is a really big deal in human beings, and it's a really big deal throughout history. It's a really big deal, and to sort of say it's not a big deal when you deny reality at a level like that, it's going to be tough. And yet, there are people who, for a whole variety of reasons, find it easier to live straddling across that line. I'll say it that way. So Justin Wells has been doing great work on his channel. His channel is tiny. I want to bring some of his stuff on. I want to do a live stream with him about story. He teaches documentary at Biola, and he's a Hollywood cameraman. And he's been doing a lot of really cool videos about story and different forms of story. And he has one good video about sort of these borderline characters. And borderline characters are really important. I, in some ways, am a borderline character, function in a lot of different ways. I know some people get very frustrated with me because I'm not, I'm as borderline as I am. Maybe they really don't understand. We need borderline people. And I think Peugeot is right that in this world, you're going to have ideals and hierarchies around ideals. And you're going to have, you cannot eliminate the fringes. And Peugeot talks about that in terms of Old Testament laws about gleaning, talks about that in terms of gargoyles. And I think Peugeot is right. And so I think to sort of try to eliminate the category of transgender used to be transsexual, whatever it is we're pointing out. I don't think you're going to eliminate the category. It's going to be there. And in some ways it serves a purpose. But, and I think Peterson said this well in his conversation with Vivek. Peterson talked about it well in his conversation with Grossman. Peugeot talks about it well. The fringes have fringes. And when you sort of eliminate the structure, it blesses no one. And so the real challenge is to continue to try to keep a healthy structure and a healthy culture that allows the diversity while still allowing hierarchy and normativity, because normativity um, gives fringes their reason for being. Because once you make everything normative, then nothing is normative. So, all right. Oh, and then Khalid Safir coming in and talking to Sam. That was fun too. It was totally cool learning about a religious tradition that I knew nothing about. And then I have a friend at Living Stones who is I got a lot of Persians in my life, but they're all really different. So Jacob, um, Jacob from Iran, and then another friend of mine from Living Stones. He's not on the channel. I won't mention him, but he grew up in Iran, came to the United States. Um, I think his basically when the Shah went out of favor, bunches of people had to leave Iran, and so his family left Iran, and he was a tiny little boy, and then he grew up and his parents didn't like the public school options, so they sent him to Christian school, and he became a Christian. And so he's a member of my church. He doesn't come that often because he doesn't live real close, but I asked him about this, and he's saying, yeah, if you want to look at um, if Christians feel persecuted in America, they should look at sects heretical to Islam in places like Iran and Iraq. They get persecuted. They get persecuted hard. So that the fact that they're popping up in places like the UK should be no surprise. Um, and this is what so any of you, so I do read the comments, and I wish I had time to talk to all of you, because Vivian B, um, Vivian B, I develop in my mind a framework of who you are, and so when I talk to you, usually that framework is broken down to a degree. But this is what makes life so interesting, because on one hand, Vivian B often comes in with a perspective which is a little bit more, um, oh gosh, uh, ascendant, let's say. She's rather sensitive to the criticism of women, et cetera, et cetera. And here she makes this comment about trans women. And again, the problem is that there is not just one source or type of trans woman. And I know some of these people personally, and they have shared their stories with me. And if you listen to their stories, sometimes you can say, I understand why you are the way you are and why you want to be the way you want to be. And I think for a lot of people, Peterson said this right away in 2016 and 17 and 18 too. What's going on in our public conversation about transgenders or trans women and trans men, it's just got to be absolutely painful for a lot of the trans people out there, because so many of them, they are trying to pass, they are trying to live this way, and all of this attention is not what they're looking for. Yet now all of their, God help me if I ever have allies, because if these are the allies of trans people, these beasts that are coming up in the zeitgeist of this culture right now, man, 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 unbelievable. That's right, you're a feminist. Yep, that's who Vivian is. And so I'm glad Vivian is here, and I'm glad she makes her comments. And this is why I like this little corner, because again, I'm high in openness, and I want to talk to people. I want to talk to people. Um, all right, here we go. Okay, what are we up to? The week in review. Um, Dum da dum da dum. Are we to this week yet? So we did the Pope. Oh yeah, the collapse of unstable religious formation of modern fandoms, and that's where I get more into J.K. Rowling's. And Kale and I do a lot of conversing on Twitter and in DMs, and I gotta have if I ever have more time to do things, I want to have more standing conversations with people like Kale and Sam because um, people like Kale and Sam, Jacob. Oh, Jacob, I couldn't have said it better myself. Jacob is my ally. He is. He really is. All right. So, collapse of fandoms. Yeah, yeah. There's so much here. That's such a good podcast. It's so well made. There's so much to it. I could make dozens of shows just on this one. And part of Paul Anleitner made a comment on Twitter, which I actually put in today's video about all of the religions that are going on, and that's a part of what we're struggling with is that we have so much worldview shaping propaganda that we're immersed in. And so, Trekkies and Harry Potterites, all over the place. So, and it's just fascinating the degree to which J.K. Rowling's is God and the author of the Bible of this whole community. And then it's this deconstruction because you have all of these little Potterites out there and they're deconstructing and they're divorcing their God. Which is J.K. Rowling. It's just insane what's happening. So yeah, let me scan for questions here. All right. Let's see. How are we doing on time? 11 o'clock. It could be worse. Oh, okay. Yeah. This conversation, it kind of had a slow start. And I think partly because hierarchies bind and blind. And so John Vervaeke has obviously been busy with After Socrates, all the Voices with Vervaeke, and you might notice the better production values that John has. John, at least as of Thunder Bay. So Jordan was working with a couple of guys, I won't mention them, that were kind of helping to manage and promote Jordan's stuff. And then Jordan basically left them for Daily Wire. And these guys then started working with John, and which has been a huge help for John because I do all my technical stuff myself, with the exception of what Rick does, which is immense and incredible. But so John couldn't have done After Socrates without that team. And John, of course, John's been on some very big podcasts and platforms. And of course, he continues to have his day job, which is in academics, and he continues to write books. And so John he's very generous with his time, but he's also increasingly in demand. And he's working on, looking at the psychology of practices and talking to guys like Guy Sengstock and Rafe Kelly and Greg Enriquez and a bunch of the people on his channel. And of course, those groups are always getting larger. Poor Jonathan Peugeot. I went to last Friday. I went to my first mass, actually. Some of you will be surprised by that. I went to my first mass, and it was a mass for a mother of a church member. And that's where I took some pictures on Twitter. And for me, I go to a service of another religion or another Christian group, and it's like a kid in a candy. I just can't get enough of everything that's going on. Looking at the culture, looking at the architecture, looking at the vestments, looking at the practice, looking at the kneeling, listening to the words. And so it was just a tremendous thing. And I tweeted out, I wish, I want a pocket version of Kale Zeldin so that I could go to a place like this and Kale would say, well, there's this and there's this and this, and this is where it came from. And this is where it came from. That's right. Am I in trouble for booting Claire? No, you are not, Chad. You're not. In fact, I didn't take any wrenches away. I found the place that I could, and I looked at everybody who had wrenches, and I was happy with that. And so I've distributed power, and with great power comes great responsibility. So use your responsibility well. Oops, that's not what. So yeah. So Kale is just such a you find some people sometime, and Kale and I can sort of get on the same page pretty quickly. We've got probably enough in common in terms of what we're doing. So, and I was there, and I was thinking, yeah, I just wish I had Kale with me because we could talk about this and talk about that. And when I visited Kale in Rhode Island, he gave me a tour of where he teaches, and it was just fascinating. It was just absolutely fascinating. But Jordan Peterson has all of this money, and he's able to dispense all this opportunity. And so, poor Jonathan Peugeot's getting dragged around the world. He's in Rome, he's in Jerusalem, he's in Florida doing the Exodus thing. So I hope this is all working well for Jonathan's career. But yeah, boy, Jonathan's got a lot on his plate. They just updated the Symbolic World website, and it's really interesting for me how they're sort of pulling that all sort of under one thing. So instead of having Patreon and all of that stuff, and Peterson's sort of done that with Daily Wire too, but Jonathan's sort of bringing it all together. Let me star some questions here because I don't want to miss them. They go off the screen. And yeah, Jonathan's had his world, had his world shaken, but I hope it's the question of, I have it easy in the sense that I'm a minister in the Christian Reformed Church. So I don't have to mind that shop. I have to mind the Living Stone shop and, dealing with, I wish I had a guy like Chad who lived in Sacramento, because, I'd have Chad helping me with all of the physical plant stuff here. I love watching Chad do his tile work. Ethan comes down from Reading, and so we're going to have another Ethan. We're going to have probably some chainsaw days where we attack all this stuff. So I'll let you know when that comes. Ethan drove down from Reading, not from Reading, from Reno, 3 Saturdays in a row to help us put up the fence. So, I have gotten a lot of help, but yeah, but Jordan has Jonathan, and poor Jonathan. I shouldn't say poor Jonathan. I think Jonathan's been having a ball, but it's a lot. It's a lot. And then to manage a whole website and a community and to do all of that, it's a big deal. So let me answer Philip's question here. What does using Quest change the conversation? Well, John Van Donk and I first proposed a topic of religious, what did we say? Religious history, baggage or resource, something to that degree. And Jonathan and John didn't like it. And so then we worked some more on it. And then we arrived at the quest for a spiritual home. And John really, hammered in that quest, because quest has a sense of, there's sort of a religious, Arthurian, the quest for the Holy Grail. And you don't quite know where the quest takes you. So it's not just a search, because search is like, I'm going to search for the street address. And once I find this, and once I have the street address, quest is sort of, you're not quite sure exactly what you're looking for. And this very much has that. Part of my sort of C.S. Lewis, and again, you can go back to my Easter sermon with this. I don't know that we can finally find satisfaction in this world. And I think John gets at that when he talks about something being horizontal. That home is, we're moving towards a horizon. And again, quest, Peterson, of course, famously, there's no, how to get through the cornfield. There's many different ways to get through the cornfield. So I think quest is actually a pretty important word in that. But this was the conversation started slow, and I was getting a little anxious about it. I mean, is this thing going to click? Is it going to, how? I mean, Catherine was very much in the mix in Thunder Bay because she organized that, and figuring out, how does John then fit into the mix? How does this go? And then at one point, the conversation just starts taking off, and John and Jonathan very much sort of get in sync with each other, and off it goes. And John has quite clearly a ton of ideas and a ton of good language. And I think once this conversation really got going, I really had a sense that May is going to be a lot of fun. And I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to be great. And the conversation is there. So the next day, actually, I did the Benjamin Boyce conversation, which I think I really enjoyed doing. I had a lot of fun with it. 4 is a lot for a conversation like that. Now, Benjamin Boyce is a good listener, and so he actually hosts more than he interjects too often in something like that. But I'm a talker. Jonathan's a talker. Wokel is a talker. So yeah, it's a challenge to get your to manage a conversation like that. I keep forgetting I'm not sharing the screen. All right, how are we doing on time? We're doing all right. Yep. And then this was, I was doing a little bit of preparation for the my conversation with Wokel and Boyce. And I thought Wokel's sort of walking through, the strawberries and this question of the real. I thought that was really good. So when I'd watched this video, which Boyce had posted on Twitter. So now, one of the things I learned from Elon Musk in that conversation is Twitter, you can post videos up to 2 hours on Twitter now. It's like, wow. I don't know if you have to be a blue check member, but this video was on Twitter, and I had to sort of figure out how to harvest it from Twitter. And so I put it up on Vanderclips. And I thought it was a really good video. And then, of course, I brought in some Tom Holland via Nero. This whole question of real has been with us for a very long time. And I haven't finished the conversation with Nate and Sherry and Paul Kingsnorth, but it sure starts out strong. And so that's also on the list to finish and maybe to do more work on. Kingsnorth, again, is one of these people out there that is on a quest. And he doesn't always know where it takes him. And he's got he's got his own unique story. And that's what's coming about here. Let's see if I missed any questions. Don't see any questions. Good. So, yep, that was a fun video. And then this morning's video. Yeah, I'd seen little bits of the Elon BBC thing. I'm not a big Elon follower, so it didn't really grab my interest that much. And then and then I saw John Campbell basically doing a commentary on that video, and I thought, "Oh, well, this is interesting." And because Dr. John Campbell's journey, I followed his journey through COVID. I found his channel very early on during the pandemic, and there was a while I watched him every day because he was giving, I thought, some of the best news about COVID. And he was, he's got some expertise, he's got background, and his channel obviously is blown up to, almost 3 million subs on YouTube. And it's just been very interesting watching John go through, in some ways, the deconstruction of the dominant modernist paradigm. And Brett Weinstein is obviously another controversial figure, but you can Jesus says, "Do not judge lest you be judged by the same measure you used." And that's something I take seriously. And maybe I've been too hard on Sam Harris. I feel a little bad about that sometimes. And then Mark will come in and say, "No, you're not too hard on Sam Harris." There's a lot to be gained by withholding condemnation because you always have to use discernment, but keep an open mind with people. Don't ban them too quickly. Don't dismiss them too quickly. One of the things that I've been noting too is we've had a lot of interesting conversation around Jordan Peterson on Twitter, but I follow some of you on Twitter, and I know you both on and off Twitter. And you know what? Twitter changes you too, at least my perception of you via Twitter. And so, it's really easy to sort of dismiss people because of the way they're on Twitter. Elon Musk makes a comment in that hour-long thing where, don't tweet after 3 a.m. Don't tweet when you're drunk. Elon Musk has some of his own Twitter rules that he tries to follow, and each of us could probably benefit from some Twitter rules. I have my own Twitter rules. But so watching Dr. John with this video was really interesting, and that really sent me into taking a deeper dive into the video. Someone in the comment section had mentioned the Mark Zuckerberg, Lex Fridman interview in the very end where he talks about God, and it's interesting where Zuckerberg talks about the virtual and the physical, which I think isn't a great way of saying it. But and then of course, yeah, it was a great book recommendation. I get a lot of book recommendations and video recommendations, and I can't possibly read or take in all of it. Yeah, this is one. Whoops. Byrne really wanted me to listen to Nick Cave on Unheard, and I started listening to it. The thing is, I don't know Nick Cave that well, but anyway, I get a lot of book recommendations. And when Nate said, "Oh, you really got to read Tradition and Apocalypse," just the title, and I've read David Bentley Hart before, so I knew what I was getting into. But just the title was very much on my mind when I was working through my Lenten series. So when you try to colonize me, you're going to find this in the rough draft for Sunday that comes through, because I talk quite openly in the Sunday sermon about colonizing, because I'm dealing with Matthew 28 this week. But we're all in a sense trying to colonize each other, and let's see, big me little that. We're all trying to colonize each other, and as I said in the video today, just sending a book, that's probably not going to do it. And what does it is a relationship. And that's, again, part of the reason why I'm really glad my channel isn't bigger than it is. It's really in some ways too big already, because again, the truth is I would love to have much bigger, deeper relationships with pretty much all of you. I mean, there's nobody in here there's nobody in here that I don't want to know better. Um, Hasidic tales of the Holocaust. Wow. And Jacob's been as successful in colonizing me as almost anyone. But in all fairness, Jacob's put in the work. Jacob's put in the work. He's got some advantages. He lives in the state, and he's come up to Sacramento a couple of times. So yeah, colonizing is a very difficult thing, but it's a very worthwhile thing. So, like I was about to say, I can't think of almost anybody that I've met in the last 5 years that I wouldn't like to have more of a relationship with, but I can't. And there's often the case that there often isn't a book that I get a taste of that I think, oh, I'd like to read that. And I don't, and I can't because of time and space. And so this is part of my ontological argument for the existence of a blessed afterlife where we will actually get a chance to read all the books and improve them and have the relationships and go deeper and. So, all right. Kate has a question. Do you believe in fate or destiny? Or is it what you'd call God's plan? Well, fate and destiny, those are very Greek terms. Those are pagan terms. I think God very much does have a plan, but unlike fate or destiny, God's plan is interactive with us. In other words, God's plan does not destroy our freedom in a way that fate and destiny kind of do. I'm a Calvinist, so I believe in providence, and but providence is a very interesting thing. And this gets into the whole question of prayer. Does God answer prayer? Yes. Does God move us to pray? Yes. So and this very much gets into the whole thing I was talking about in terms of these dualities. So I don't know that we, with our little brains, can ever think this through deeply enough. But yeah, I believe in providence. All right. Yeah, today's video was fun. I was really glad I did it. So the way my Friday goes, I will have I'll make my rough draft today. I will do some other odds and ends. We have a congregational meeting on Sunday. So I have to get ready for Sunday. Lots of things to do. Let's drop the link in. Pin the link. Any questions you have, you can just put questions. I haven't sent PVK any books because my wife still gets mad at me when I buy too many theological books. Yeah, I have an office, Sam. And so my wife doesn't see a lot of the theological books I buy. My wife, when she comes into my office, she just shakes her head. She just shakes her head. So, all right. So if anybody wants to come into the room and talk a little bit, again, the rule is if your camera isn't on, I'm not going to let you in. And the reason for that is we treat each other better if we see each other's faces. So there he is. There he is, my greatest ally.
We have to talk about the leaker. We have to talk about the leaker.
What's a leaker? I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, so this 21-year-old young man in the Massachusetts Air National Guard is working in IT. This is the official story, as far as we know. Is working in IT, and has access to a lot of very important, highly classified things about Ukraine and Russia. He belongs to a small Discord server, and apparently he's one of these ortho bros, Eastern Orthodox gamer guys, and they're having discussions about the Ukraine-Russia situation, and he leaks a bunch of highly classified things that end up in Ukrainian social media, and then in Russian social media, and then all over the world. And the New York Times and Washington Post helped the FBI track this guy down, and he got arrested yesterday.
Well, that's it. There's a reason they classify things. I think we all understand it. I'm sure they classify too much, but who knows?
Well,
so, what does that have to do with us, Jacob?
Exactly. I don't care about the classified information so much. I think we, at least in this corner, I don't know if you saw in Bridges of Meaning, there were 2 channels that were dedicated to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And the schism in the Eastern Orthodox Church between the ecumenical patriarch and the Patriarch of Moscow, the interrelation, like religion and how these spirits are physically manifesting in the United States and the Ukraine and Russia. This is very, very pertinent to everything we're talking about in this little corner.
It may be, but I don't know enough about it to connect the dots. So
Kale has opinions, I'm sure.
Kale has opinion. Kale has no opinions. Kale has no opinions at all.
No, I have
him on Twitter.
I hope nobody else does.
Anyway, all right. So, you all jumped onto the channel. Chad's doing his thing. What do you guys want to bring up? So, Jacob wanted to bring up the leaker.
Well, I wanted to bring up if you start. I don't know if you got to this because I was lagging behind in the stream, but if you want to start your own symbolic world or something like that and production team, hit me up, man. We can make it happen. It'll be still shoddy, but it'll be pretty good.
I don't want to run a website, and I think my contribution is about as eclectic as possible. I would rather spend my time motivating people to have in real life events, which is basically what I'm doing through Estuary and then through these events that are happening. So that's really where I want to put my priorities instead of, Jacob's or Jonathan's project is just different from mine. So I think that much more fits what he's doing. So
did you see the chat GPT story time thing I made? I did I did one where screw tape letters. I did a screw tape letter, which was crazy, and then
I haven't seen that.
Crazy. And then I did one. I tried to get it to tell a story. It didn't really do a story. It did like a summary of a story. Yeah. It didn't really do any scenes. It didn't do dialogue. It's not really as smart as you might think.
Well, one of the things that I'm learning with these AI tools are you have to really know what you're doing in order to sort of set them up to get the kind of output you want. So my sister's a lot like me, but she works in areas that are very different than I do. And she's been playing around a lot with making art using AI. And so she's actually she told me she wanted to make a video sort of teaching me how to do it or teaching people how to do it. So I'm interested in that because I like to, Grim's already playing around with that with thumbnails. So I kind of wanted to do that. But when I listened to her and talked to her about this, it was immediately apparent that I use AI to sort of be a easier search engine. Like, give me the list of, a list of something and blah, 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 blah. It's actually not terribly accurate, but it's easier than a search engine if you're looking for certain kinds of things that you know enough about so you can catch the errors. But if you really want to have it produce something impressive, figuring out exactly what to say to it, it's almost like programming language. So
yeah, in a sense, I mean, like with the storytelling, you might as well just write the dang story.
Yeah,
you might be able to, throw a bunch of stuff in there and like a summary of a plot, and it might be able to help organize things, but it isn't like like I described it to Gavin, like it's like a piece of paper can't create art, even if you inspire it to, and so like I've been like on this Nick Cave rabbit hole because of this Nick Cave conversation I listened to, which is fascinating. But like listening to his like more recent music, it's like there's no way that AI could ever even come up with this stuff because it's so seemingly random and personal. Like, so in a sense, we probably shouldn't be that afraid of it. Besides, my job isn't going to go anywhere. I don't see GPT doing it, but
I don't see it either, Chad.
I'm gonna hop out though. I just want to say thank you and toodles.
All right, Chad. Mr. Kale.
Yeah.
Well, I touched on a lot of stuff that I know probably ringing your bell.
Yeah, a bunch of stuff. I mean, this morning I was listening to your conversation in which you were, I think you were playing back and commenting on a Kings North discussion, and you mentioned that you took an interim class, one of those interim session classes on Mumford City and history, and just really intrigued by that. It's something I did as an undergrad too. I have that big thick book right back here.
I saw it when I was in your office.
Yeah.
And that too.
It's funny how often. So, that book has a couple. The chapter on Rome is really probably the chapter that we should all kind of read now, because I think we are in. I know this is a little bit of a tired comparison, but I think in the Mumford sense, we're living in the necropolis, right? And what's interesting to me is that Mumford talks about Rome as this hellscape, and we seem all of our dystopian projected fantasies are kind of neo-Roman in their sort of mean complexity or something like that. And I wonder how do you see? You seem to suggest that the machine is old, right? And we tend to think of the machine as something as sort of internet, post-internet. And I just sort of wonder, when I was listening this morning and I hit you up with a DM, I said, this is like Britain and Logers in That Hideous Strength. This idea that there are these two sort of overlapping tensions in civilization between, pulls toward Logers and, pulled towards the enchanted and pulls toward the machine. And I was wondering if this had any further thoughts on that.
Yeah. No further thoughts, but you're right. There are so many tensions we're working on right now because the machine is fundamentally sort of an automatic thing. I mean, there was, early website Mechanical Turk where you just have it something, you just go and manage this thing for me. And what we're sort of delegating out to machines is getting more and more complex, but yet the basic principle is the same. And so when Kings North said, following Mumford, that we've been making machines, we just use slaves as machines. Right. And I think that's right.
What's interesting from the Christian standpoint, Mumford talks about this in, I think, Techniques and Civilization, if I'm remembering, but that so much of the early technology in the West was created by the monasteries. And early clocks were invented so that they could learn how to pray on time. Yep. So there's this really interesting kind of Christian version of order, right? Sort of Christian, almost a kind of, monastic left hemispheric tendency That was sort of, and you said something last week, like, religion. Oh, I tweeted something out about it that I was sparked from something you said, but like religion is in certain respects sort of built out because of the unpredictability of spirit.
Right.
There's like this, and I sort of said structure and communitas are sort of the binds, but I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, that's sort of, Peterson in the Exodus seminar, as he's done in other places, keeps quoting this sort of Jung joke about, religious institutions were invented to keep people from religious experience.
Right.
And that's sort of true. It's sort of, to manage religious experience. Think about the fact that if someone wants to, someone's like, well, I really need to pay attention to my subconscious. And so I'm going to pay attention to dream interpretation. And so the first thing, okay, well then keep a notepad by your bed. Even the last chapter of Peterson's 12 Rules for Life is all about the light pen,
Yeah,
that's right. And so start writing down your dreams. Well, you know what? The minute you write down your dreams, they are no longer a dream. Yeah. They are another thing, and they are your first step towards what we would call a religion instead of just an experience. So,
right, yeah. So that's an interesting connection between well, he'll quip later on that Jung says that we're always dreaming, right? That even consciousness is a sort of form of shared dream. But that's what the artist does, and this is something that Shakespeare riffs on all the time. Conrad laments, that is the dream ultimately shareable? And it seems like we worship storytellers because they afford a space in which we can both dream together, or all 10 of us can dream together, something like that.
Yeah. And these psychotechnologies in worship. So I think a lot about, when I went to the Catholic Mass, is the architecture. And again, Protestant church is often pretty plain. Catholic church, they're expressing something. It might not be great depending on where it is, but they're obviously expressing something, and there's way more attention given to decor. It was really interesting because there was a guy there playing an electronic keyboard, singing mostly sort of evangelical songs from the 60s and 70s. I'm like, well, that's interesting. And then you've got the priest and the priest's meditation. He's doing a lot of talk about C.S. Lewis. So I'm just watching this, and I'm thinking about the psychotechnologies of a Roman Mass versus, let's say, the psychotechnologies of an evangelical or Pentecostal worship service. That's a definite psychotechnology to provoke a specific religious experience. And this is what we're doing.
Yeah, that was like when I went to Rome to study when I was a sophomore in college, and it was a semester in Rome. And up until that point, I had, I think I had been to St. Patrick's Cathedral, and like that was the only what I would just say like a real Catholic church that I had been to. Everything else was sort of, like the church that I grew up in they literally built the gym, and they housed the church in the gym until they could raise enough money to build the church, and they never wound up, because Vatican II happened. So, so when you go to Rome, and you see, and this is something I'm sure Pageau talks about all the time, but like the buildings, the whole thing is a technology formed with repeating patterned symbols, ordering, whatever, the mind, the body in all the different ways. And it's all out of the Apocalypse. All the iconography is out of the Apocalypse. And so that there's this sort of this deep embodied instruction, at least in theory. Now, a lot of that gets, decluttered, so to speak.
And if you look at the tradition of English hymnody, it's almost all from the Apocalypse as well.
Right.
And in other words, you have this transformation from architecture into music.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that.
And hymnody, if you look at this sort of the golden age of English hymnody, when in England they were writing hymns in order to teach the masses doctrine and theology and to catechize them.
Yeah,
it's this, it's this massive movement, this just him after him after him after him, and it just changes England. And of course, that of course will all come to America, and will found American evangelicalism in many ways. So,
Cool.
All right, well, we should bring in Eric. Eric, what's
up, everybody? Hey, I actually wanted to bring the conversation back to the conversation we were having about ideology, and bring up the conversation about Job a little bit. I posted a comment on one of your videos earlier this week about how Slavoj Žižek, I think that's how you pronounce his name, but he had a really good clip, and he's actually had a couple other things on the book of Job as a critique of ideology, and how the book of Job kind of starts this change in how I guess people see success and failure in the world, and how previously to this point, you were blessed by the gods if you did something good, or you were cursed by them, and that's kind of what these three friends of Job said every time they would come to try and talk to him while he was going through his thing. But Slavoj really makes the point that at the end, God says that there was no reason for you didn't do anything wrong. This was a bet essentially between him and Satan, and that this kind of starts this whole. I think Chesterton also brings this up, where that this starts this critique of ideology. It starts this. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I don't know if you had a chance to think about that at all.
Well, I think the book of Job is so in some ways the book of Job is a powerful. I talked a little bit about these dualisms and God number one and God number two. The book of Job just takes God number one dogma and puts it back on its heels, because the heart of sort of God number oneness is karma. Do good things happen. And it's sort of karma plus rationality to say, okay, so if you have a syllogism, so do good things happen. Therefore, if bad things are happening, it must be because you have done bad things. I mean, that's essentially the argument of Job's friends. And the book of Job says, no. And the whole framing of it says, you little man, which is basically what God says to Job at the end of the book. You little man, what do you really know? What do you really know? And can you sort of take God number one theology and figure out the world? And the answer is no. So that alone begins to critique and deconstruct all sorts of rationalities and ways that we proceed. And Žižek, Vivian notes that she took a class with Žižek back in the 90s and he hasn't changed a bit. I think that's probably true. Also, there's a whole little corner in the corner with Sherry, and so there's a very vibrant group of people around here that would love to do nothing better than to talk hours with you about the book of Job. So I haven't read Chesterton on Job, but Chesterton is always insightful.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's kind of maybe why I brought this up, is talking about the trans debate recently. And that's kind of the main problem, is that we have people who are clearly suffering some sort of dysphoria, some sort of issue that's always been present in people. And this ideology is what actually has emerged recently that is trying to give them reasons and answers and labels for their internal feelings, and leading them down towards paths that might be more harmful to them than their natural path.
Right.
And so I think that's maybe why I'm thinking on this subject, that we're living in a time period where ideologies are everywhere, and they're becoming so harmful to certain people that we really need to be very, very careful and critique any kind of belief system or any kind of new idea that's emerging right now.
Yeah, yeah. There's in the witch trial of J.K. Rowling, in one of the episodes, they talked to ContraPoints, but then they also talked to someone named Noah, who transitions at a very young age. And the person, it's a lovely interview, and the person sounds quite together, but I just can't help thinking at their age, when I think about, and any older person sort of mentally remembers themselves in past stages and thinks, oh boy, oh boy. And when you do something like something as dramatic as significantly altering your physiology and your body chemistry, I fear that decades from now we are going to have a population of people that are going to be really angry. So
Yeah, I agree. And I think
Jake,
that's
go
some
ahead.
people want that to happen, I think.
Paul, did you notice? I mean, so because of you, I went and listened to ContraPoints talking about on that podcast, and it was precisely what you and Wokel and Benjamin Boyce and Pajot were talking about. This idea of, I have no power. Like, ContraPoints is like, no, I have zero power.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, you're the darling of an enormous number of people, and I have no
But
power.
I wonder if I could just butt in here. I mean,
Yeah.
I know why we're all laughing, because all of the sort of the cultural momentum is flowing in that direction. But is it possible? Sort of, and this is maybe me being a little bit King's Northian here, but I mean, is it possible that that's an incredible statement, honest statement? That if I have no control, I mean, I would argue, in my sort of most honest Christian way, that they're very much under some other control, and we would call that a spirit. And I have got no problem saying that, and that of course is never going to break the real fourth wall of the rolling podcast, for obvious reasons. But I mean, that's what I think it is, and maybe that's a sort of a moment of honesty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, she definitely thinks she has no power. There's no question about that.
Right. So, but Wokel, I think it was Wokel was saying, or maybe it was Lindsay, I said whatever, I saw it somewhere. But that it's absolutely vital that they always understand themselves as always being the beset upon, fringe operator, right? But so I get it on an ideological level. But if you're sort of whatever, doing the kind of level up thing and trying to really look at what's going on here, it would appear that it's true on that other level too.
All right, Mark, your time in the spotlight. You jumped in.
Yes.
You have something you want to say, or just want to talk about navigating patterns?
Well, I've always want to talk about navigating patterns. We're going to do, since you brought it up, we're going to do judgment on the live stream at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Okay.
We did discernment, judgment. The last one's going to be action in that series. Hopefully I can explain it. And that's why I like all this talk about ideology. And this segues into, I really like what Eric was saying, by the way. It was really, really good stuff. Your video where you mentioned J.K. Rowling and equated that with religion, half as long, more of it. The discussion really needs to be around ideology versus religion versus cult. These things need to be discerned by people, right? Because they don't understand. And then you can extend it. You can say, well, what makes a good religion versus a bad religion? And of course, navigating patterns. I have a video called Religious Patterns. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. It's really good. But it's important to realize this, because a lot of what, say, Eric was talking about and that you were sort of leaning into would be what John Vervaeke would call a perennial problem. We're stupid when we're young. We don't feel right. Well, no kidding. You're growing up. Of course, you don't fit anywhere. You don't even fit in the same clothes week to week when you're young. Like, duh, right? But we're not accounting for that anymore, right?
Yeah.
So we really need that conversation and that discernment around What's a cult? What's an ideology? What's a religion? What's parasitic? Because that's what Eric was really talking about is, some parasite came in with a solution to a perennial problem. And I would argue that actually, as much as I love John, he's wrong. They're not perennial problems because they don't have solutions. They can't be problems if they don't have solutions, right? It's more like patterns in life that happen, right? They're inevitable. Maybe they're not all inevitable in the course of your life, but across the course of life for people, these problems are inevitable. Like almost everybody suffers from grief at some point. But to John's point, there's no solution to grief, and therefore grief is not a perennial problem. It's just a thing.
Yeah. That's a good point. Mark. Thanks.
So more discernment, more talking about ideology versus cult versus religion. And I would argue that religion is more around something you can live within, and that holds the entirety of your life and not just your life in the moment. Because a lot of these things, and I think this is what Eric was pointing to, whether we realize it or not, right? Your life in the moment as a teenager who's confused with hormones and changes and growing and learning about new things. You can have a solution to that by just changing one thing, but you're not going to be that teenager all the time. And that's where those ideologies fail. That's where a cult would fail. That's where a better or worse religion would handle that better or worse in the fullness of the cycle of life, accounting for babies, accounting for children, accounting for teenagers, accounting for adults, accounting for older adults. All of this stuff is wrapped up in that. It's another thing that I really liked about Mary Harrington talking about the 3 stages in the divine feminine, right? In that archetype. So I just want to say more of that, please. Please.
Right.
I want to agree with you because I've had the same thought, and thank you for elaborating on what I was saying. But part of the problem we have is we need some sort of education on what is a cult and what's a religion, because in America you have freedom of religion, but does that mean you have freedom of cults too? Like you can make your own cult and you can harm people, because cults, slide under the radar as religions for decades, centuries before, their true harm is exposed. And then what do you do with all the people that were harmed by them? It's the same thing with this new trans ideology. You can point to a number of different cults that do the exact same thing.
Yep. I want to highlight one of Raj's points here. Do religions advocate for discernment, whereas ideologies and cults do not? I think that's a big piece of religions have a degree of humility and liberty about them.
Parasitic.
Go ahead.
I mean, my good friend Steve, Skojic, the sort of the trad deconstruction guy from 1 Peter 5, his primary critique with tradism in the Roman Catholic Church, or that variety, is precisely that it sort of required you to sort of not ask questions about certain things. Now, I don't know if I agree with him 100% about that in the specifics, but I totally get what he means. And I think that Raj is probably onto something. I mean, when I took a modern ideologies course, that was always, my teacher always, that was the point. And, he would always say, look, if a system, requires that you ignore something and then specifically says, don't ask that question, then it's an ideology. And, and so we would spend, so we went through all the various iterations of modern ideologies, and we would find the spot, where Marx says explicitly, don't ask that question, and you could sort of do that with all of them. And so we were taught, for and that's why I referenced Justin Martyr way back in the day, Paul, that if it's true, it's Christian. In other words, Christianity, for it to be true, has to be completely unafraid and fearless about that. And as soon as it puts cultists or whatever in front of truth, then that's where problems rise. And look, that's ultimately what corruption's about, right?
Yep.
In all of its varieties.
Yep. Robert, you've been waiting a while.
Hey, everybody.
Is the New England estuary beginning?
It's we don't have any dates yet.
Oh, wow.
We don't have a venue. We're looking for a venue. Wendy is going through the protocol, and I'll join. I'll do that probably this week, or I'll jump in one of the calls. Mark didn't mention it, but me and him had a 2-hour conversation at Starbucks the other day. That wasn't a short video,
Really?
Mark, that we had. There was a long video.
Yes,
We didn't film it. It could have
I
been a
love
long, but yeah, it was good. What did we talk about, Mark?
all kinds of things. This little corner, we talked about all the different aspects, some of the TD underbelly stuff that nobody knows about, and some of the more overt stuff that everybody misunderstands. It was all good.
So I was telling Mark about. So I also have camera equipment and stuff like this, and Justin was on the art group last week, and that was really cool. I got to talk to him a little bit, and he told us about his. Check out his YouTube channel; it's really great, really great.
Yeah, he's doing great stuff with his channel.
Yeah, if you want to learn about filmmaking and especially the documentary parts, he teaches this book. Well, it's a guy called Bill Nichols wrote a book, and Justin is teaching that book in his class, and it goes over the different types of documentaries that you can categorize. And I was telling Mark that I think what this corner needs is it's called cinema verite style, sort of, which is like it's modified. There's different ways you can do it, but I think it's like through the characters of this corner, you get to know the corner the best. And I would say that Mark is like one of the characters.
Mark is definitely one of the characters.
And of course, there's a lot of characters, and other things I want to see is what is it like when Paul goes to Whitensville? What does it look like when that happens? I think that would be good. That would be some good verite.
Paul in Massachusetts. Is it the same as Paul in California?
Well,
tune in, find out.
There may be less homeless people, but I don't know. There's probably a lot of differences.
Yeah. No, Whitensville is, and it depends what time of year. So I mostly just hang out with my mom in Whitensville when I'm there. But you could. I don't know if the location works well, but you could talk to the pastors in Whitensville. I think they would give you space. They are interested in starting an estuary. It's just that they, like many other pastors of Real Things, are cautious about guarding their time. And
right. I think a once a month kind of thing because it's about an hour and 10 away from me.
Okay.
Which that's once a month I could do that. I mean, I could do it more than that, but it's just sort of gets impractical a little bit. No, absolutely. And plus, Whitensville is kind of out of the way for a lot of people.
Yep. It is out of the way. It's a small town that's out of the way. You could. I do have a brother-in-law who is at Park Street, right on the Boston Common.
There we go.
And I don't know. He's not an elder or a pastor or anything like that. But if I put in a good word for you, he would listen to me. He's my brother-in-law. So I don't know how flexible Park Street is with that kind of thing. Park Street's fairly conservative. So, but I wish I had more Boston resources for you.
There's tons of stuff in Boston. Boston Public Library would do it.
Oh, yeah. Some groups have met in libraries. So I forget which estuary was meeting in a library. So we did it up in Nevada City. We had a group in Nevada City. So we just lost him. All right, John, what do you want to say? You think I
I thought this was the Bald Man cult group.
Yeah, bald man. Well, look at
yeah.
Look
so
at
that's why
Eric
I talk about cults. I thought this was like a Bald Man group, except for that guy. That guy's a heretic right in the bottom there. He's a cunt right now. Right now.
Look at
repent
that
of your hair. Repent.
Look at all that hair.
Repent of your head of hair.
We got plenty of hair here.
No hair on thy head.
All right. Did you have a question, John?
Yeah. So obviously, thank you for having me up again. And you guys are talking about like the function of religion as opposed to function of cults, and I could maybe chime in with my viewpoint on this, and that a religion is obviously it's a Latin word for religare, like to hold together. So basically, it's something that it's supposed to hold together in times of, peace and in times of turbulence. Whereas a cult would be something like maybe a reactionary kind of group that forms, either on the internet or in real life or wherever. And I've seen this with like definite cults. It seems like most people in cults, though, they're in denial that they're in a cult, but when they're afraid to leave, like they're afraid to leave because they're afraid that they won't be able to make new friends or build new networks. So they're dependent upon that cult. So it almost comes like a unhealthy codependency. Whereas I guess a religion actually empowers people, gives them a direct way towards God and spirituality, and it actually empowers people to be better citizens, dare I say that word, and more healthy for the nation as well.
Any comments on that?
I would say cults. Yeah, I mean, most people fall into cults because
every time I
find and
come on here, everyone's like, "What the fuck?" Yeah, sorry.
they find an
I can be
answer in
provocative.
the cult.
I'm sorry.
So like they're not really just like sticking there for their friend group, is because the cult has offered them solutions to all of whatever problem they thought they had. The cult has given them an answer that is simpler than what reality is, and so they've gone all in on that one thing. And it usually isn't until they're forced to wake up by something in their life, the cult fails them in some way. That's when they realize the scales fall from their eyes, and they're like, wait, what have I been doing for the last 10, 20, 30 years? And then, that's the hard process of making sure the person doesn't double down at that point and be like, no, I just gotta, my faith is weak. I just gotta re-educate myself. But then, taking those little moments to wake a person up, be like, that doesn't make sense, does it? And then, you can slowly have the dominoes fall.
One of the things I watched the HBO documentary on Nexium, and Mark Regari, is that his name? Regari? And that Nexium cult was very interesting. There's some interesting documentaries on cults. I think Eric, you said it very well. They have a sort of this, and religions can do this too. I've seen religions do this where, Jesus is the answer for the world today. Okay. Is Jesus the answer for hair loss? There's a sense in which you sort of constrict the world so that it fits your answer, and cults manage to use all sorts of manipulation to sort of keep people in that idea, and then at some point, hopefully, the Oxford Union appearance of Megan Phelps Roper, and I'm really tempted to do more work on that, because it's a classic example. And and there's all sorts of oddities, such as she was a huge Harry Potter fan, and her Westboro Baptist Church had no problem with Harry Potter, which everyone would think would be, no, Westboro Baptist, these low resolution pictures of others, they should be totally against Harry Potter, back when Christians were sort of attacking J.K. Rowling for wizardry and magic. But Westboro Baptist, they're actually a very tiny church of very hot, very smart, mostly lawyers who just had a particular matrix of, this is the matrix, and they went at it with a lot of effectiveness, even though it was all rather cruel. Sam,
would you say that cults are idolatrous in some way, or like a definite way?
Can I take a stab at this definition of cult thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
I feel like most of the time the word cult should probably not be used by people, because it's often meant to dehumanize as much as it's ever really used accurately. I mean, I've been accused of being in a cult more times than I can possibly repeat. And oftentimes it's for the purpose of, we don't need to listen to what he says, because he's basically not a human agent. He's being controlled by something bigger than him. He's brainwashed. He's deluded. He is not thinking for himself. And therefore, we can put him in the category of outside needing to be engaged with respectably. And that's a very cruel thing to do to somebody. And it never works the way that you think. It doesn't have the effect that you think of, except for protecting yourself from whatever it is that you think that they're saying that you don't like. But that doesn't mean that I don't think there are such things as cults. I think that, but even then it's blurry. Your mileage will vary. I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses, which is perhaps like the thing that most people would mostly agree is a cult, it benefits a lot of people that are in it. And
they're not really a cult, though. I wouldn't call it a cult.
Well, fair enough. I'm fine not using the word cult for them either.
Yeah.
Even though that they can be relatively controlling. Yeah. And that when people leave, they often have to sacrifice lots of their relationships, including with their own family members. And that's one of those signs of cultish behavior. But like, honestly, by almost any definition of cult, it would be virtually impossible to argue that early Christianity was not a that. Even the healthiest forms.
That? Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, John.
People have said before, I'm sorry to interrupt, but people have said before, and they do this with like early teachings of Christianity, early teachings of Islam, you know, they would have called that a cult, but then when they realized it was all about empowerment instead of this codependency, right, how we know of as cults, then everyone basically adopted it. I mean, if you want to talk about spiritual, like if you want to differentiate between religion and cult, that would be the differentiation between the two. Whereas I think the cult is obviously.
I'm just saying, would a cult be something that, you know, causes you to intentionally harm someone close to you for your beliefs? Would you like if you, so Jehovah's Witnesses are accused of being a cult.
That's definitely like if somebody who's outside of that cult is a definite infidel in your leader's mind, and your leader is the embodiment of truth, faith, and holiness.
Well,
and so,
how about in the book of Acts, when two people are withholding money from the financial giving to the church, so the apostle Peter, with the power of God, strikes them dead. That's right there in the beginning of the New Testament as a story within the first year or two of Christianity. I've never heard of any cult that has the power to strike people dead with a word.
Well, the Jehovah's Witnesses do.
Transparency.
So one of the things that they get accused, specifically Jehovah's Witnesses, for being a cult, is because of like the blood transfusion thing. So they will tell you that you are supposed to let your child die if they are, you know, they need a blood transfusion, and that is forbidden. You would rather have your kids die and get resurrected in the paradise than to have a life-saving procedure.
Yeah,
so
but
I think that
Jehovah's Witnesses are right in that a blood transfusion would cause you to get the life from some other organism and exclude you from the kingdom of God in eternity. None of us know for certain that they're wrong about that. So they're doing that for a reason of love. And
well, they're doing it because he said don't eat blood. The reason says that in the Old Testament, one of the laws was you're not supposed to consume blood. And their definition
but that's like the sub reason. The final reason is that they want their members to enjoy life eternal, and that they worry that accepting blood transfusions puts that at risk. So in a certain sense, they're taking the long view on that one. And this is what I mean. I think at the end of the day, the distinction between a cult and a not cult is that a cult benefits the leadership at the expense of its members, whereas a healthy religion benefits all of the people, is benefiting the members at the benefit of the organization simultaneously, sort of parasite versus symbiote. But even then, your mileage will vary. There are people in healthy organizations that have been severely harmed by them, and there are people in cults who have had their lives turned around for the better. Like Jehovah's Witnesses tends to often attract people from the lower socioeconomic rungs of society, and oftentimes people with perhaps drug or alcohol or various sorts of disordered lives, and it gives them super strict rules, and it gives them a very strong community that enforces behavior along those rules, And I bet it's straightened out the lives of many, many people because of that. And that there are many people who are living lives of complete disordered, drug-fueled chaos that are now the better because of Jehovah's Witnesses.
I agree, but growing your children up in that organization can be far more damaging to a child who doesn't choose it. So if you're a druggie on the street and your life is messed up, and they come to you and you do a 180, of course that's great. But if you are born into it and you're raised under those rules, and you're not told, that there is another way to live or another way to interpret anything that they say, that seems culty to me.
But that's perfectionism. That's part of the problem. This universality, this perfectionism, this individualism, where, had I only known. It's like, that's nonsense. It's not a state you can inhabit. So yeah, sure, from a third-party perspective, with hindsight, we could work these things out in the past, but you can't do any of that in the present, and you can't do it for the future, because these things aren't perfect, and that sucks, but also too bad. Like, that's what we're born into.
Sam, did you have anything else? You just want to wade in on the cult thing, or do you have anything else you wanted to ask or bring in?
I guess I would just always recommend that you treat people like they're human beings. Even if you're worried that they're Chad, am I getting your
Chad. I muted him. Okay.
And that it's particularly pernicious to take someone's sense of agency away by labeling them as a member of a cult, because that's actually very seldom the case, that someone is under some completely weird mind control thing. Most of the people in a cult believe it because they're actually a human being who believes in what their cult teaches. And they're happy to tell you so. So that's just my final piece, I guess.
All right. Look who's here.
Sam, before you go.
Oh, go ahead.
Hey, Sam, before you go, I would just like to take issue with what you said about early Christianity being a cult, right? Because, by one definition, sociological definition that, seems to be somewhat accepted these days, what they would call a cult it doesn't have to do with the specifics of religious belief. It doesn't have to do whether or not we think their religious beliefs are good or bad, or acceptable or not acceptable. It really gets down to controlling and manipulative behavior. And so from a sociological definition of the term cult, it's effectively describing a systematic set of control techniques. Right. And also, just to point out, somebody in the comments said, I think it was Ari, said in the comments, like, a cult is when you can't leave, right? Or you can't leave, without being disconnected from your family, or, without having, there's certain types of things, and I guess, and I know, like, we've talked about the Plymouth Brethren and stuff like that before, but and some of these, and I just look at it this way, right? Some of these are present inside of Christianity because these are easy ways, or we think, right, to try and get people to behave the right way, right? And now, ultimately, I think it doesn't work on the long term, but it can earn short-term benefits.
Yeah, and I think that most cults can't last very long if they are intergenerationally harmful. And I have a decent number of friends who are former Jehovah's Witnesses. Unitarianism does a relatively good job of helping those sorts of people find a home for all the obvious theological reasons. And it's interesting that I think Jehovah's Witnesses has gotten a lot worse in the last couple decades. Yes, I think definitely. That in the early history of the organization, a lot of its peculiar theology was there, and they were always very end times focused. But it's really under certain leadership in the recent past that it's kind of turned into the very controlling and emotionally manipulative thing that a lot of us recognize. And, not that long ago, if you were to leave Catholicism, you would often be sacrificing your family to do so. My mom left Catholicism in the 70s, and it was very hard for her and her family. And, it's healed and gotten better since then. But not that long in the distant past, to leave Catholicism, you would have sacrificed basically all of your family ties. And so I don't, it's, I want to, be a little bit fair that some of these religions that are actually healthy in the long run do have a lot of these tactics that keep people in them, and they think they're the only true one. That's like almost every religion thinks that at some level, really. Even the Unitarian Universalists have their weird cryptic way of thinking they're actually secretly the only right ones. And that I think that part of this is that from our very modern individualistic lens, we're very suspicious of any group or leadership that has any sort of authority or control over the people within it. And that's actually just been very normal and a healthy part of human history for a long time. And we just view that with suspicion now, and it looks very weird in our modern day and age. And so I'm not saying that there aren't such a thing as cults. Like when you watch that documentary about what is it, Wild Wild Country, of that thing in Oregon that had like that guru guy and the guru lady. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's a cult. that one's a cult.
The Heaven's
Fine.
Gate cult. The Heaven's Gate cult too is pretty terrible. I mean, I'm wondering if a cult has ever been a cult whose primary aim was to be of service to people outside of its community.
There are cults that certainly had some element to that, but even any group is going to have a balance between feeding the group itself and benefiting outside the group. I mean, churches are always navigating that. I've seen churches that are so focused to helping everyone else that the church just sort of disappears because you have to. It's sort of like the caretaker has to
pay their own clergy's salary. They don't pay other churches' clergy's salary. That's right. They maintain their own parking lot. They don't maintain everyone else's parking lot. Yeah. So, or else it just dissolves. For the same reason that your family buys your own groceries for your own family. Maybe you do a little bit of charity, but.
I want to get to some of the questions here, and then we'll land the plane at the half hour here. This is from Chad the Alcoholic. Don't know where this guy's coming from, but he says, any thoughts on Jonathan saying that Grimm is the self-proclaimed holy fool? I'm not sure it was charitable. I don't think Jonathan was being uncharitable. I think Grimm, in fact, it's not that I think, I know Grimm makes people nervous. And when you're talking about getting up on a cross and a jock strap and at paintball for Jesus and having people shoot at you, people do care about their sacred. Oh, look at those goats. Oh man, isn't that cute? People care about this stuff, and so I wasn't surprised that when you put together a conference like this, it's always, and this little corner is so rife with these kinds of questions. Where do we draw our lines? And so when you have someone like Grim Grizz, who is very much a fringe character in some ways, and I've called him that in many times, but yet he's also he's sort of a stakeholder too, because he's one of the, he's got one of the more active communities going. How do you balance those tensions? And what we're trying to do in this little corner is just so full of trying to navigate those tensions. And we've got many people in the comment section who have sensibilities and sensitivities that we trip, and then they say, I'm out of here. I can't take Vervaeke, or I can't take Vanderklay, or I can't take Peugeot or Peterson or what have you. And so, when Jonathan Peugeot runs a channel called The Symbolic World. If you give them the sense that you're playing sort of free and loose with some of their sacred symbols, people will push back. It's just what happens.
I don't think it was an insult, though, because he says Jonathan always points out that we're living in the upside down. And so the holy fool would be exactly what you need in an upside down world, right?
Yeah. No, I don't think he meant it insulting or dismissive. and I've noticed this. I mean, people take their sacred things seriously, and the Orthodox have things they take very seriously. So,
well, what he said to you, Paul, was, I would be against anything that was in the direction of desacralization, and that when he was like the paintball for Jesus thing, like sort of like how liberal churches and even evangelical churches with some bait and switch evangelism thing, they get some mileage out of taking a holy thing, stepping it down a little bit so that it's a slightly transgressive thing to do.
yeah.
And that, like, ooh, like I'm doing, we're slightly desacralizing something and I get to be a part of that. But they use that as trying a hope that eventually you'll move in the direction of secularization again.
Yeah.
And
That's
I
a
think
good point.
that's what Peugeot, it was interesting to hear, like, sometimes you get a sense that Jonathan Peugeot really has very strong moral taste buds.
He
A lot
does.
of the times he's pretty easygoing, but then like sometimes you hear very I don't know, redliney Peugeot. And that came out in him in a way that I didn't expect when you were talking.
Yeah, no, I wasn't surprised at all by that, and some of that redlininess, people manage where and when they show that redlininess in them. So no, that's true. That's true.
Well, and I wanted to point to that again as part of the problem that it clearly exhibited all over the place. Although again, it's not really a problem because it's not a solution. If you try to interpret yourself, if you try to do the judgment yourself, a perfectly innocent statement sounds like an attack. And that's the issue. That's why I'm talking about judgment tonight at 7 p.m. on Navigating Patterns. So sometimes it's appropriate to do that, to say, oh, what did he really mean? Right. But often we can't know. So I was out to dinner with my friend and we came back to this house and she asked me, she said, are they home? And I'm like, how would I know? I've been with you this whole time. Why would you ask me such a question? I couldn't possibly have the information. I'm not in the house. I don't know if they weren't home, by the way. I didn't know that. I was like, why are you asking me this question? Why are you asking me to judge? I have no idea.
Well, I have to definitely get in CW's super chat, and it's a shame that Cal left before I got the super chat in. Thoughts on the legacy of Harold Bloom and the overall health and ongoing viability of the Western canon? He follows this up with Cal. Cal will have an opinion on my super chat question, but I'd also like to hear from others on the notion of Western canon of literature.
That's classical liberalism. I actually caused a problem for poor James Lindsay. I corrected James Lindsay about liberalism. I said, you can't use liberalism. You have to use classical liberalism. That's what the liberalism is grounded in. And that's what constrains it. And then it works. Like when Jordan Peterson says, I'm a classical liberal, and maybe he doesn't even realize this, he's saying something very profound and important. The liberalism aspect is grounded in the classics, right?
Right.
It's grounded in this.
Yeah.
And that changes it, because if you have constraints for the liberalism, then it's not anything goes, safety religion, race religion, climate religion, whatever other religion we want to come up with this week. That's liberalism because it's pure. It's untainted in some way. And so the Western canon is the thing that lays down the groundwork, that historical grounding for the constraints that keep the liberalism in check, such that it doesn't just spread out and universalize across the world and then vanish because there's no difference between anything, and now killing people and not killing people is the same.
Well, and it's helpful to mention the Roman Catholic Erasmus, because in many ways it was Erasmus in the late Renaissance period, early Reformation period. Erasmus redid classical education, and this Erasmian process permeated all the way up until, much more modernistic educations that emerged in the 20th century. And so even though a lot of Orthodox and Catholics like pointing fingers at Protestants, Erasmus was actually deeply foundational in this project of
and the Renaissance broadly was
Yep.
also very much into breaking out of the Christian canon into the Western canon, and the Renaissance was mostly a Catholic affair. I guess my 2 cents. CW is an awesome person. I think that it's sort of part of the desacralization. I just need to learn how to say that word of of theology departments into English departments. That sort of, and Paul, you talk about that a lot.
Yep.
How English departments took over the theology department.
Yep.
And so we needed a new canon that wasn't the New Testament canon or the Christian canon. But it's very hard to justify what that is. It was hard enough for Christians to come up with a Christian canon. It's virtually impossible to defend a Western canon. And the postmodernists and the campus activists have had a heck of an easy time shooting that apart. And I don't necessarily agree with those critiques, but they have a point in that it does seem arbitrary, and that you need something to explain why it's not arbitrary. And you're going to have a really difficult time doing that without something transcendent to point to defend it. And so I don't think I think it's an untenable middle ground to just have something like a Western canon. I'm not saying don't read Plato. I like reading Plato too, but I think that a Christian can defend reading Plato better than a humanist can.
Yeah. It was interesting in the Megan Phelps Roper talk at Oxford Union. She was asked, "Are you still religious?" And she basically said, "Well, literature is sort of, she basically said literature is sort of my Bible." And I thought, yeah, that's she made that move. It was very interesting. All right. 4 minutes left.
All right.
Are we done?
I guess maybe I have a little bit of maybe I lost a little bit of a train of my thought, but now when you say classical liberalism, what does that mean exactly? And how has that taken over Christianity in some way?
I think classic liberalism is best seen in New England. New England has a history, and that's basically the hub of classical liberalism. Right, Mark? Didn't we talk about that?
Yes, we did talk about that.
Mark and I agreed on that.
What would be the definition of classical liberalism?
Based in the Western canon. Like
John Locke.
Yeah.
John Locke.
Individual
you can't
freedom.
narrow it down to enlightenment at all, because the Enlightenment is informed by Plato. Like the Enlightenment is the rediscovery of the Greek and Roman texts. Like the Enlightenment doesn't work without that. It doesn't.
It's also a transformation of Plato, because when you read Plato's Republic, it is not Plato's Republic is not an Enlightenment political organ.
It's not political at all, and we anachronistically put it in a political frame. I'm pissed actually now that I'm reading it, because I'm like, I knew everybody misunderstood this book. There's no politics in it at all. The whole chapter 2 makes it clear. The purpose of coming up with the city is to solve a specific set of problems around scalability and children, right? And so it states Gnosticism very clearly, and it states you need, in order to understand justice, that's the only goal. One goal, justice. Justice is not sufficient for a city, so it can't be political. It can't be. It is not possible that he's talking about politics in the book anywhere. Not possible. It's ruled out. And
you should write a book about this,
That's
Mark.
wrong. He's talking about justice. He's not talking about anything else explicitly.
I think what's happening.
There's a book club that we do on the Texas Wisdom Community YouTube channel. You can see more of my thoughts on this there. We'll be doing more book club resuming next Saturday, not this Saturday.
Go ahead, Eric.
I was just saying what I think is happening, why the conversation of classical liberal and what is the classics and what are we basing all Western literature on is a symptom of a larger trend that's honestly been going on probably for decades now, where there's like this archaic revival, is that we've gotten to a point in our culture, society, that we don't know who we are, where we're going. And it seems like we've reached a dead end and no one has a vision for the future anymore. So everybody is trying to go back in time to a period where the world made sense. And if you are raised religious, you're going back to some sort of religious fundamentation. If you're a liberal or educated in some sort of way, you're going back to the classics and trying to find what is in our past that made the world make sense, and where along this timeline did everything go so haywire. And there's also a reason why I think psychedelics and shamanism are resurging too, because that's as far back as you can go. You can't go back further than, people in the woods taking drugs and there was no writing and just singing songs and, being a tiny community. And the people are searching for something in our past that can give us stability today, whether it's classical liberalism, whether it's psychedelics, whether it's Christianity, Islam, something has to be giving us that foundation, because if we continue where we're at, it's just a cliff. There's no future.
That's the problem of progressivism, right? Which I still have a video on navigating patterns. But yeah,
Do
you
you
can't.
think
John
that
Vervaeke says we can't go back, but that's wrong. We have to go back to a point where we had a base, so we could stand somewhere to see the future.
Yeah,
and
the Renaissance was going back.
Right, the arguments around where that's going to happen, because even Vervaeke says we can't go back, and then says Neoplatonism. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, John, but you're going.
But his
back.
his awakening from the meaning crisis was going back to the very beginning. If you start at episode 1 and do all 50, he literally goes back as far as you can go back. So, like, he's doing the same thing. He's trying to find something in our past to give us stability.
I'm going to say something controversial, possibly. Is it the possibility that we have social decay right now and people lack direction in their life in all areas of society? Is that because of the sexual liberation and the growing number of single parent households?
No, nobody ever says that.
No, I think
it is.
You're right, but we have done something.
You're right. It's a serious question, though, because there's a lot of.
Everybody's saying that. Like, there's no disagreement on that front.
Okay.
The question is what caused that. That's the question.
Right. I guess so. Okay, that's not controversial, but the question what caused it is controversial. Okay.
Even in yourself and others, because sexual desire is a. I remember reading the. I think it was Siddhartha Gautama, and he's achieving enlightenment, and he says something to if I had any other desire stronger than sexuality, I probably wouldn't have made it, because it's like sex is a powerful thing, and hey, happily so, we're still here.
Well, yeah, I'm not trying to be a Puritan or anything like that. I'm just saying, because of the lack of sexual morality, I guess, or lack of repentance for people committing adultery and ending no-fault divorce, and that you had the breakdown of a family and the family unit, and basically only single mothers are raising. Well, not only single mothers. Over 50% in America right now are being raised by single mothers, and they're not. The next generation is not being revived like they're supposed to do with a traditional structure, and so basically, maybe one of the reasons why we lack direction in our life, because all of our structures and that held the industrial civilization together are falling apart, and it's almost moral chaos at this point, and so people are kind of scrambling on where to go from here. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts.
Absolutely nobody is saying that. Not a one. Nobody out there is talking about the destruction of the family. Certainly not James Dobson 20 years ago. Certainly not. I mean, people have been talking about that forever, and partly because I think the harder questions are, number one, what are the best tools to help people achieve? Because actually, chastity, let's call it, to use that as a short term, chastity is an achievement. How can you help people achieve it? I mean, you can try all kinds of ways to sort of cut off people's ability to enact things, but then it squishes out into all other ways. And so, and I'm one of the videos I'm really tempted to do is one on this question of law, because can we as a society, let's outlaw adultery. Yeah, outlawing adultery has never been tried. Oh, outlawing fornication has never been tried. Oh, all of these things have been tried, and now part of what happens in the kind of society we have is that people have way more options of doing things, and So it's a much more complex thing, and to stand up and say y'all can't keep it in your pants. Well, yeah, they can't. Why? How can we help them? That's I think a better conversation. So
Maybe
anyway,
dressing modestly. Okay, I could probably debate
dressing modestly, but the thing is,
dressing modest. I'm not even kidding.
Well, no, but
Like
the
not
funny
having
thing
your
about
butt
modesty
hanging
is,
out. Yeah.
so you no longer see knees. Now everybody gets geeked about ankles and eyes, because eyes are the sexiest part of the body, actually. That's if you want to see two people make contact, it's eyes. So if you can, okay,
But
we're
I
gonna
mean,
take
just like
away
the
eyes.
body parts, you know what I mean? Like the breast, and especially in women, right? Like they wear revealing things. So I'm just saying, like, don't wear such
Only we
revealing
had
things.
legislation telling women not to go topless in the street. Gosh, that'd be a new idea.
This has all been tried, and it all hasn't worked. Like, this is uncontroversial.
So, and it's not that, and it's not that there's nothing. That's not that there's no place for legislation or law. It's just that, you know, yelling about it. I mean, I could stand up in front of church and say, "You're all doing bad, and you gotta stop. Just stop it." It's like, it's not very helpful. Anyway, I want to land the plane here. So
right.
Thank you for coming on, everyone.
Thank you, Paul.
And
Thank you, guys.
And take care.
See you.
Bye.